Many years ago, a group of 12 of us teens went on a backpacking trip to a Southeast Asian country during our midterm break. Among the things in our itinerary, we had wanted to stay in a mini theme park casino hotel that was situated high up in the mountains. Only thing is, we were bad at planning to say the least, and pretty much thought we could bunk anywhere at any time and in any hotel. We didn't book in advance. It was peak season, unfortunately, and when we got there, no good hotel could accommodate us. In the middle of the night, carrying our large backpacks, we had to wander far from the lights of the main resort down into the other side of the dark, desolated mountains. You see, other than the resort located at the very top of the mountain, there were very few people living there, nor were there many establishments around the other areas of the mountain. It was dead quiet. The journey to find a place to spend the nights at 11 p.m. was unnerving, to say the least. The mountainous areas away from the main resort were completely devoid of life, and tall trees surrounded us from all sides along the main path. Beyond these trees were an unmanaged dark forest, and pretty much no one ever went up into the forest. It wasn't until we walked quite a distance in these conditions when we saw a large parking lot with a rather dilapidated hotel in the middle. There were what seemed to be a smatter of large black char marks at the side of the hotel, creeping all the way from the third to the ninth floor, indicating that there had once been a relatively huge fire in the past. On all sides of the parking lot, you could only see tall, intimidating trees looming ominously, obscuring the lights from the moon. The only light from that area came from the rundown hotel building, without any street lamps to illuminate the parking lot. Clearly, this area in general had been neglected for quite some time. The parking lot was desolate. In fact, there was only one dusty car parked near the hotel building. To be honest, some of us in the group were very apprehensive about staying here, but between walking aimlessly in the eerily silent woods, staying out in the cold of the night mountain air, and staying in at the very least, hotel type establishments, the choice was very clear. Either way, we would only be staying for 3 nights. What could possibly go wrong? The interior of the hotel was a lot less menacing than the outside, though evidently aged and slightly musty. The professional smiles of the receptionist at the front desk assured us that this was a functioning lodging space. We asked for rooms with the cleanest living conditions, and they booked us at the highest open floor, which was the 12th floor. For whatever reason, they told us that two of us had to be located in a room relatively far from the rest, as they had patrons on the floor and there were insufficient consecutive rooms for us. This struck us as odd because the hotel seemed extremely quiet, and at times we wondered if we were the only guest. Nevertheless, we agreed. Me and a large burly friend decided that we would take the corner room for two, as we didn't care too much for the games through the nights and constantly interrupted sleep. The corner room seemed peaceful enough, and well, someone had to make the sacrifice after all. This roommate was the person in the group of 12 that I had known the least. He was a religious foreign student, older, and his habits were all very new to us. There was much we didn't know about what he did, at least before the time he knew us. That and his imposing stature, exotic and unfamiliar appearance, at least for a teen at the time, made it slightly more intimidating to be trapped alone in a dark room with. However, from my interactions with him, he seemed rather mild-mannered and quiet, so I wasn't opposed to sharing a room alone with him. "Is this hotel haunted?" one of my friends half-jokingly asked the receptionist. They paused for a moment, looked at each other, and gave an ambiguous, polite smile to him as if he had just told an inappropriate joke. The elevators were small and could only fit about 9 people crammed side by side. Me and my roommates and this other guy took the second lift. Strangely, the lift stopped at the 6th floor on the way up, and what we saw when the doors slowly parted open spooked us. The entire floor was pitch dark, and walls were charred and everything was burnt black. It was clear that after the fire had devastated the level, no attempt to repair the damages had been put into place, and the entire affected floors were condemned altogether. We peeked outside the elevator and there was not a soul in sight. Who had pressed the floor button, I thought to myself. But we figured it must have been a glitch in the elevator system. It was a really old hotel after all. We talked about this with the other group of 9 who had just gone up. They mentioned that their lift, on the other hand, had mysteriously bypassed the 12th floor and stopped at an unnumbered floor just above, presumably what was once the 13th floor. Once the lift door opened, what they saw sent shivers down their spines. It seemed like the floor above them held some kind of singular units right at the end of the corridor, perhaps what might have been an old residential suite. The door right in front of them was completely sealed up from top to bottom, with thick metal chains bordered with wooden planks and stuck with spirit-warding amulets and Chinese talismans. The entire floor was dark, and the only source of light was coming from a creepy red candle that was lit in front of the door. Clearly, the management of the hotel was greatly disturbed by whatever was in there, and had gone to great lengths to keep it from being unleashed into the residents of the hotel. They said they had frantically mashed the buttons to close the doors and got down to the 12th floor. To be honest, contrary to all that we had seen thus far, the 12th floor wasn't too shabby. The hallways were decently lit and cleaned, though there was a musty old carpet smell that filled the air. All in all, it seemed livable, like the nightmarish scene we had encountered on the 6th floor. Me and my roommate made our way to our unit, ironically numbered 1212 at the end of the hallway next to the stairwell. Upon entering, a gust of unusually cold air engulfed us. The room was clearly worn out, with dark stains on the walls, heavy scratches on wooden furnitures, and, of course, the creaking beds. The toilet, well, it was much worse. The mirror was slightly cracked in some areas, the faucet had heavy indented scratches, and we could have swore we saw traces of long hair with what seemed to be residual dried blood stains at the dry corners of the tub. There was a dreadful heavy feeling in the room, but neither of us knew why we felt like that. We had an early rest that night, and although the bathroom light switched off mysteriously and the toilet flushed on its own in the middle of the night, we chalked it up to a faulty switch and continued sleeping. Nothing much happened that night. On the second night, I had problems sleeping, having drunk way too many energy drinks at the theme park that day and stayed all the way up until 3 in the morning. Lying in my bed on my cell phone, if I recall correctly, it was 3:16 in the morning, and that's when things started to get weird. The TV suddenly switched on by itself with nothing but static on the screen, and then it turned itself off. The bathroom door slammed incessantly, and the faucet sounded like someone repeatedly turning it on and off every few seconds. Somewhere from behind the walls beside my bed, you can hear the muffled whispers of a lady continuously uttering. But that could have been a guess from the room beside me. Despite all this, my roommate somehow managed to stay fast asleep, leaving me to face the horrors by myself. Suddenly, everything stopped and the room was eerily silent again. I turned to look at my roommate, hoping for him to have been awoken by the ruckus so I had some company. But no reaction. He was facing the ceiling, blissfully unaware of what was happening. That's when 10 seconds of foreboding silence passed, and then suddenly he sat up and turned towards me, with his eyes still closed, and said in a deep, unnatural, raspy voice. I stared back at him in shock, half expecting him to jolt up. It seemed like he was still fast asleep. Was he sleep-talking? I kept wondering to myself. I couldn't sleep that night. So, the next day I complained to the receptionist that the next-door female neighbor was causing quite a ruckus that night and disturbing our sleep. The receptionist shot me a puzzled look and told me the neighboring unit had been vacant for the past month. Last night was the worst. I didn't have much problem sleeping that night as I was completely exhausted and dozed off at about 10 p.m. It was when it was around 3 a.m. again, I suddenly woke up to the screeching sound of moving furniture in the unit above and violent, frantic footsteps. I rubbed my eyes sleepily and wondered what all the ruckus was about. It was then that I saw 7 black figures in the room. 6 of them were standing around my roommate's bed, staring at him, 2 on each side of the bed, and 1 stood at the entrance of the toilet. This figure seemed to have its neck craned downwards, looking for something on the ground. At that point of time, I thought that my roommate must have invited our other friends in or something while I slept. So in my groggy state, I didn't pay much heed to the black figures. After all their attention seemed to be focused on my roommate. Everything was eerily still. All of a sudden, he started moving strangely. The bed sheets rustled wildly, and I realized he was actually slithering off the bed, upside down, arms pulling his sleeping body along one at a time. Upon reaching the floor, he plopped down, motionless, facing the ceiling. Freaking out, I flinched. Immediately, all the black figures rapidly swiveled around in sync. The figures had their attention on me now. They knew I was awake. They knew I had seen them. In tandem with the figures, my roommate finally arched his back, head hanging upside down. With an erratic jerk, he contorted it to the left, where I laid. I was absolutely terrified. I knew I was cornered in this dark room. My only source of light was the tiny glow seeping through the gaps of the curtains. I could barely see where I was going. He chanted these lines frantically on the floor, arms and legs twitching wildly. His eyes were still shut. At that moment, I turned my back, frantically searching for my cell phone hidden between some of the pillows for some light. A menacing whisper blew across my left ear, and I felt two cold hands brush my neck. I instantly jumped out of the bed in fear. There he was on the bed right of me, his head upside down, crawling up from the floor beside my bed. His hands were poised to strangle me, fingers outstretched and tensed in a peculiar and human manner. Lips quivered into a creepy grin. I dashed towards the main room light switch and flipped it on. In an instant, the room was flooded with light. My eyelids slammed shut and I flinched for a few seconds, adjusting to the sudden influx of brightness in what was a pitch-dark room just a second ago. When I opened my eyes, the black figures were gone, and my roommate was sprawled out on the bed, asleep, completely ignorant as to the terror he was just a minute ago. I noticed that the rosary he kept beside his bed had snapped into little beads as well. I took a chair, sat down, and watched him the entire night with the lights on, fearing he would start attempting to strangle me again if I fell asleep. Trying hard to stay awake, I whipped out my phone and began looking up the history of the hotel. Woman found beheaded in gruesome hotel murder. August 16th, 1998. A 30-year-old lady violently beheaded by her husband with a chopper found missing from the hotel kitchen. Her body was found floating in a pool of blood in the bathtub with her head placed next to the faucet on the top of the tub, eyes still wide open in terror facing a door. I took a look at the pictures. One of them was a picture of the room taken from the outside. Never had I imagined that seeing 4 numbers would give me such a feeling of dread. The room was 1212, and it was our room. I glanced at the toilet door nervously and instantly felt a cascade of goosebumps rush down my spine. It was as if her gaze never left the door. Apparently, the arrested husband swears he had been sleeping that night and woke up suddenly to find his wife murdered, with his hands covered in blood holding the chopper. No one believed him. Police ruled it as a homicide. Till this day, my roommate has no idea at all about what happened that night. I told him he was sleepwalking and that I was playing games on my phone the entire night after waking up and not being able to sleep. My friends all know what really happened, but we agreed that keeping it from him was the best thing to do. We found out from the janitor before leaving that the room at the unnamed floor was once the site of a traditional folk ritual that the hotel owners had organized in 1997. It was to ask for spirit help in boosting the failing hotel's business. Apparently, the ritual went tremendously wrong, and all 6 of the mediums invited lost their minds and started decapitating each other with kitchen knives, smearing the entire room with blood. That year, a massive fire devastated most of the hotel as well. The unfortunate incidents finally stopped when they brought in a renowned temple priest to seal the room. Room 1212 was right underneath the sealed room. Readers of NoSleep, always check the history of the hotel you're staying in. If you don't, you might never get to leave or check out. Business trips are dreadfully boring, especially in my line of work. The only good thing about them, hotels. The tedium of day-to-day dealings, bookend with clean towels and a mint on my pillow. If I could live in one, I surely would. There's just something in the ambience that soothes my soul. At least, that's how I felt until staying at the Covenwood Inn. It seemed like any other hotel at first. Typical floor plan, decorative arrangements, overly polite check-in clerk. It wasn't until I received my key card and ventured up to room 371 that I would notice a dissonance in the layout. Something amiss that broke up the usual hotel landscape. In my room, placed deliberately on the bed, was a sheet of paper. Restrictions printed on official Covenwood Inn stationery. Here are the list of guidelines for room 371. Number 1. No television after 9 p.m. Number 2. Only accept incoming calls on the room phone. Number 3. Leaving your room between the hours of 10:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m. is strictly forbidden. Number 4. At least 2 to an elevator at a time. Never go alone. Number 5. No visitors. If there's a knock at the door, ignore it. Number 6. The minibar is for emergencies only. And number 7. The view is a lie. Don't trust it. Enjoy your stay. This was odd. I had never seen anything like it. Not once, in any of the hotels I stayed in the past. Perplexed, I called the front desk for answers.
All rules are to be followed during your stay.
The clerk stated this plainly, as if he had uttered it 1,000 times before.
I don't understand. What kind of emergency would warrant the use of a minibar? And why can't I watch TV past 9? What does this view is a lie even mean?
I was offered the same reply, spoken with the same tone as before, not unlike a recording.
All rules are to be followed during your stay.
And that was it. No answers, no explanations. Assuming it was some sort of strange hotel humor I was unfamiliar with, I threw the list on the bedside table and forgot all about it. Until later that night. As I laid in bed, watching the 10 o'clock news, something completely out of the ordinary happened. The reporter began scratching at her face. A little at first, but then a lot. Her motions became aggressive and skin began peeling. Blood dripped from the wounds as she continued to relay her report without missing a beat. No one seemed to notice or react to her appearance. Eventually, she froze in place and stared at the camera. Then, a close-up of her face, grotesque and mangled. Her bloodied lips spread apart and offered an ominous sentiment.
Don't break the rules, Jack.
I jumped out of bed, left my room, and ran downstairs. My voice echoed through the lobby as I barged over to the front desk.
What the hell is going on here?
The receptionist didn't so much as blink at my intrusion.
What can I help you with, sir? I just watched a news reporter tear apart her own face and tell me personally, to follow your bizarre hotel rules. Is this some kind of a sick joke?
He pointed at the wall clock behind him.
It's 10:18, sir. In room 371, there's no television past.
I grabbed him by the collar.
I don't appreciate being toyed with. Continue this jest, and there will be a call made to the authorities. Mark my words.
I let go of him and stormed off, his monotone voice trailing off in the distance.
All rules are to be followed.
I returned to my room, shut the TV off, and laid down to sleep, pissed off but exhausted. Unfortunately for me, my slumber would be short-lived. I awoke later that night in a fit of sleep paralysis, pinned in place by my own body. At the foot of the bed was a shadowy figure whose features I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. A warmth overtook the room as it stepped over to my side. My heart began to race. Closer now, I could see it was a man, maybe in his 50s, well-dressed, gray mustache. He leaned over me and spoke with a disturbingly unnatural timbre. His voice echoed off the walls and met my ear with an inhumane cadence.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Jack. Are you enjoying your stay so far?
I tried to break free of my chemical restraints, but it was no use.
Where are my manners? I'm Garrett Covenwood, the owner of this hotel here. I like to greet myself to guests whenever
He
I
rested
can.
his hand on my arm. There was a stinging sensation where his skin met mine, but I could barely wince in response to the pain.
Follow the rules, Jack. If you don't, you're in for a bumpy ride.
All at once, the warmth dissipated, and the sound of my cell phone buzzing rendered me fully awake. I jolted to a sitting position, reclaiming my movement. The man was gone, and my arm was fine. Thank God it was just a nightmare. I quickly grabbed my phone and answered. It was my boss, Coulter.
Hey, Jack. There's been a change of plans. Need you down in the lobby right away. What? What for? No time to waste. Hurry up.
I looked at the time. It was 12:36 a.m. I was forbidden to leave my room according to those damned rules. So I called the front desk.
Listen here. I need to come down to the lobby and meet my boss. I don't care what your rules say. There better be no weirdness. You hear me?
The sound of tapping away at the keyboard filled my ear.
Sir, our records show that your boss, Coulter Brumlock, is fast asleep in his room.
Confusion washed over me.
In his room? Asleep? How would you even know that? Are you telling me there's no one in the lobby waiting for me?
I hung up the phone and dialed Coulter's number. After 2 tones, he picked up.
This better be good, Jack. I was sleeping. Coulter, you didn't just call a moment ago and ask me to meet you downstairs, did you?
He let out a groggy sigh.
Of course not. What are you talking about? Can I go back to bed now?
Another wave of confusion struck.
Sure. It was probably a wrong number or something. Sorry to wake you.
Before hanging up, I asked him one last question.
Say, you didn't get a weird list of rules from the hotel, did you? No. Now let me sleep.
He hung up and I sat there, contemplating things. Honestly, it felt as though I was hanging on my sanity by a single fragile thread. I had told myself those images on the TV were the hotel's doing, but this couldn't be faked. Coulter and I had known each other for years. I knew his raspy voice anywhere, better than I knew my own. It was definitely him on the other line, but at the same time, it couldn't have been. It was, by all means, a mystery. The next day of work came and went. Before long, Coulter and I met back at the hotel where we dispersed to our separate rooms. What was once the highlights of any given business trip was now tainted by uncertainty. For a good, long while, I sat there in bed, still in my dress attire, pursuing the list of rules on the bedside table. I couldn't make sense of them any more than when I'd arrived, but it had become abundantly apparent that something was going on, something unexplainable. Part of me hoped it was a product of a tired mind overworked and succumbing to the side effects of exhaustions, but lies. Even the ones we tell ourselves only stretch so far. After undressing and climbing beneath the sheets for some much-needed rest, there was a knock at the door, and rule number 5 came to mind. No visitors. If there's a knock at the door, ignore it. It felt silly, but I did as the rule demanded. Better to be safe than sorry, I thought. The knocking, however, was soon followed by a voice. It was Coulter's voice.
Jack, are you in there? Your wife called me. Said she couldn't get through to you on your cell. Something happened to Leslie.
My heart sank. Leslie was our daughter. I jumped out of bed, ran to the door, and opened it at once. Coulter walked in, visibly troubled.
What's going on? What happened to Leslie?
Coulter bore a look of deep concern.
It's not good news.
My heart was pounding. He looked at me, almost teary-eyed.
Leslie's dead, Jack.
All color vanished from my room. What air I had in me left my lungs in a single, labored breath as a steady stream of tears wet my face. Coulter put his hand on my shoulder. I fell to the bed, broken.
The truth is, Jack, you broke rule number 5.
Now I have to hurt you.
His lips stretched into a wicked grin and his body froze. He was as still as a statue.
Coulter, I don't understand.
In a flash, his hands lunged and connected with my neck. With a viciously tight grip, he began squeezing the air out of my lungs. I tried to fight back, but his strength was overwhelming. I managed to get in a few jabs to his head, but it didn't seem to have any effect whatsoever. He forced me to the floor and continued to clench my throat, until finally I lost consciousness. In that moment, I truly thought I was a goner. I woke in bed the next morning, alive and well. I quickly reached over for my phone and noticed a text from Charlotte. Just put Leslie on the bus. She misses you terribly, so do I. Please be safe, we love you. I got out of bed and raced to the bathroom mirror. My neck was void of bruising, no signs of strangulation. I called Charlotte to be doubly certain. To my relief, Leslie was indeed fine, as alive as she was the day I left. It all just felt so real. Could it really have been a dream? Frazzled, I met up with Coulter and we drove to our next meeting. I could still feel his hands wrapped around my neck. I refused to make eye contact with him the entire day, and he noticed. What could I say without sounding certifiable? Hey, the hotel left me this weird list of rules to follow, and now I think I'm seeing things. Want to stop for coffee or before you drop me off the nearest hospital? No, that wouldn't bode well. Mild food poisoning from the sushi at the hotel bar was a far better excuse. Only a few more days of torment, then I could leave. That's what I kept telling myself. Little did I know, my next night there would be the longest one yet. I awoke at 11:22 p.m., at least according to the blinking display of the alarm clock on the desk across the room. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed a faint orange light dancing in the wall, pouring in through a gap in the curtains. I pulled myself out of bed and walked over to the window to identify the source of the light. What I saw was absolutely horrifying. The hotel was ablaze. An enormous fire engulfing the ground floor. The flames grew to great heights and touched the glass in front of me before I had the nerve to turn away and make a run for it. In leaving my room, I yelled to warn the other guests.
Fire! There's a fire! We need to leave at once!
No one joined me in the hall, and there was no sound at all coming from within any of the rooms on the floor. Had everyone already evacuated? Was I the only one inside? I opened the first door in reach. It was unlocked. Inside was the reporter from the TV, her face still dripping red, staining the carpet below. I slammed the door shut and moved on. In the next room was Coulter. I watched him strangling a copy of me before his head turned and we locked eyes. He threw my lifeless body to the floor and started running to my position. I closed the door and ran to the next. This room contained yet another impossibility, the worst one yet. It was my wife and daughter standing at the door. Their eyes were vacant, drained of all human emotion. I watched, astonished, as their skin burned to a crisp before my eyes. Charlotte spoke first.
We miss you terribly, Jack.
Leslie chimed in after.
When will you be home, Daddy?
I couldn't escape them. These horrors were around every corner. In a last-ditch effort to run away from my troubles, I bolted to the nearby elevator. The button was jammed, but I kept pressing it. I looked down the hall to see the reporter, Coulter, my wife, and daughter all walking towards me.
Come on! Work, you piece of crap! Work!
Finally, the button gave way and the doors opened. I hopped into the metal box and pushed the button for the first floor. The doors closed just as the ragtag team of zombies closed the gap between us. I slid to the floor on the verge of a heart attack. The ride down offered no solace, no lull in the supernatural calamity I faced. Without warning, the elevator dropped, plunging into the depths of the hotel, far deeper than I thought possible. I gripped the railing as tight as I could as the lights wavered in and out of life. In between flickers, Garrett appeared before me.
You've broken almost every rule, Jack. This is what happens. You'll destroy us, if you're not careful.
He vanished, the light left with him. Knowing my death was fast approaching, I closed my eyes and thought of Charlotte and Leslie. I could see them playing outside in the rain on the day I left. It was always heartbreaking to say goodbye, and this would be no different. I held on to their memory and braced for impact. As the elevator neared the end of its descent, Garrett's booming voice entered my mind and broke the trance.
Oh, Jack. Wake up.
Jarred, my eyes opened and I fell back, landing on the floor. The unique abrasiveness of carpet brushed against my skin. I was no longer in the elevator. Upon taking a deep breath and gathering my wits, the familiar surroundings set in. I had inexplicably been transported back to room 371. As I looked around in disbelief, happy to be alive, I noticed the list in my hand. Rule number 7 was now circled. The view is a lie. Don't trust it. It took a minute to register, but I now knew what it meant. The view through the window. There was never any fire. It was just another ploy to get me to leave the room, and I foolishly took the bait. My eyes darted to the alarm clock on the desk. It was 1:47 a.m., meaning it was now safe to leave. I needed to get the hell out of there, and fast. I stood up, marched to the door, and grabbed the knob. It was hot to touch, burning hot. I pulled my hand back instinctively to avoid the harsh heat. I then noticed the charred wood at the bottom of the door's frame, indicating fire. Real fire. But how? I thought the view had deceived me. I looked back to the list for answers and noticed a postscript scribbled in pen. You should have followed the rules, Jack. You did this. Now we all have to suffer. My eyes scanned the page for more clues to no avail. They kept landing on rule number 7, in addition to being circled. It was underlined with a striking red ink. Why did my attention need to be drawn there? Was it just gloating or something more? That's when it hit me. I walked over to the window and peered outside. The fire raged on outside my room, but the world below seemed unaffected. No flames, no firefighters. No one running out of the hotel, just a plain parking lot. Traffic on the main road, trees in the distance. As normal a view as one could hope to expect from this particular vantage point. But the view was a lie. I tried opening the window, but an unseen force closed it shut on my fingers. I screamed and pulled them back. In a great deal of agony, I lifted the chair at the desk and threw it against the glass. It shattered, revealing the world outside for what it really was. I saw the fiery wall below and heard the guests screaming in peril. There was indeed a fire, and I was truly in danger. Still in pain, I picked up the list and looked at rule number 6, the mini bars for emergencies only. This was certainly an emergency. Without any time to waste, I opened up the mini bar next to the desk. Inside were no drinks or food, only a small black box with a red button affixed to its surface. I pulled it out and placed it on the bed. There was now smoke seeping into the room through the outline of the doorway. Looking over the list again, there were no further instructions, nothing at all pertaining to the box. There was only one course of action left to take. I closed my eyes and pressed the button as hard as I could, putting my life in its hands. Memories played in my mind like a film reel running in reverse, the day's events followed by the previous and so on. I relived all of the fear and torment in a matter of seconds, until eventually my eyes opened and I found myself in line with Coulter at the front desk waiting to check in. I can't explain how, but I was back in the hotel lobby on the first day of the business trip, the day we checked in.
Say, Jack, what happened to your hands?
I looked down and saw the bruises left by the window. He was cut off by the check-in clerk greeting me. I was now at the front of the line.
Do you have a reservation, sir?
I stared at him for a while, remembering everything that had happened. I then backed away from the counter and turned to leave.
Jack? Where are you going? Sorry, Coulter. I think I'm going to get an Airbnb instead. I'll see you tomorrow.
He waved his arms at me, frustrated. and then turned back to book his room. I heard the clerk handing him his key card before I reached the exit.
Here you are, sir. Room 371 on the second floor.
We hope you enjoy your stay.
I was working the late shift at the old eerie hotel down the street, a place I had seen better days. The lobby was dimly lit, and the ancient grandfather clock in the corner ticked away, adding an eerie soundtrack to the night. The storm raged outside with rain and wind lashing at the windows, making the occasional flicker of the lights even more unsettling. It was nearing midnight when I heard the creaking of the heavy front door. I looked up and saw a tall, shadowy figure slowly entering the lobby. The stranger was wearing a long, tattered coat that seemed drenched from the rain, and their face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. My heart raced as I greeted them from behind the reception desk. "Welcome to the Riverside Inn," I said, trying to hide the unease in my voice. "How can I help you?" The stranger didn't respond. They just stood there, dripping water onto the worn-out carpet. I could barely see their face, but something about their presence made me feel uncomfortable. The tension in the room was unbearable as I tried to maintain my composure. I continued, "Do you need a room for the night?" Finally, the stranger nodded and placed a stack of soggy bills on the counter. Without a word, I handed them a rusty brass key, and they disappeared into the labyrinth-like corridors of the hotel. I watched them go, my fear growing with every step they took. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I decided to follow them discreetly, my footsteps muffled by the faded carpet. As I ventured deeper into the hotel, the storm outside intensified, casting eerie shadows in the narrow hallways. The stranger's footsteps echoed through the empty corridors. Finally, I reached the door of the room I had entered and pressed my ear against it, straining to hear any sound from the inside. What I heard scarred my memory till this day. Soft whispers of threats, like a conversation with the abyss itself, emanated from the room. The words were hard to hear, but the malevolent tone was unmistakable. I rushed back to the front desk and called the local police, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. They arrived quickly and, with the guns drawn, entered the room. I watched from a distance as they confronted the stranger. Inside, they found an empty room. The stranger had vanished, leaving no trace behind. The officers searched the room thoroughly, but the only thing they discovered was a single note on the dusty nightstand. It read, "You should have let me in." To this day, I can't forget the haunting encounter with that enigmatic figure, or the feeling that something otherworldly had passed through the Riverside Inn that stormy night.